"Congratulations, you're terminated," my wife's sister, the HR, barked. I handed over my badge. "You have 15 minutes before the system fails." "Tell my wife's dad I said good luck." The panic in her eyes was priceless. "Look, I've seen my fair share of corporate disasters in my 15 years of keeping servers alive and databases from having nervous breakdowns, but nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for the day Tiffany waltzed into our company like she was auditioning for Real Housewives of Silicon Valley. You know that feeling when you're watching a horror movie and the protagonist decides to investigate the creepy noise in the basement? Yeah, that was me watching Tiffany's first day as head of HR, except I couldn't turn off the TV and grab some popcorn. The warning signs were there from day one, flashing brighter than a Windows blue screen of death. First red flag. She showed up in heels so tall they could have doubled as stilts for a circus act, clicking across our office floor like a metronome counting down to corporate apocalypse. Second red flag. That fake tan that made her look like she'd been dipped in orange juice concentrate and left to dry in the Arizona sun. But the real kicker, the cherry on top of this disaster Sunday, was her opening speech to the entire company. "Hi everyone, I'm Tiffany, and I'm here to HR our way into the future," she announced with the enthusiasm of a game show host revealing the grand prize. The silence that followed was so thick you could have cut it with a butter knife and served it at a funeral. I watched from the back of the conference room as our seasoned employees, people who'd survived 3 different management changes and 2 revolutionary office redesigns, stared at her like she'd just announced we were switching to interpretive dance as our primary form of communication. But here's the thing that really got under my skin. The woman had literally completed one online course. 1. Compassionate Terminations in 5 Easy Steps, she'd proudly announced during her introduction, like she'd just graduated summa cum laude from Harvard Business School, instead of clicking through what was probably a $40 course she'd found on some sketchy website between cat videos and celebrity gossip articles. The nepotism was so obvious it might as well have been written in neon letters across the company entrance. Tiffany wasn't just any random hire. Oh no, that would have been too simple. She was the daughter of our CEO, Mr. Vance Harrington III, a man who'd built this company from the ground up back when dial-up internet was still a thing and people thought Y2K was going to send us all back to the Stone Age. Vance was old school, brilliant with business strategy, but apparently had a massive blind spot when it came to his little princess. What made it even more infuriating was that Tiffany didn't marry into this position through merit or even charm. She married into it literally. Her husband was some finance bro who played golf with Daddy Dearest every Sunday and probably sealed this deal somewhere between the 7th and 8th hole. It was like watching a medieval political alliance play out in khakis and polo shirts. The buzzwords started flowing from day 2. Synergy, optimization, streamlining, right-sizing. Each word dropped from her glossy lips like little corporate grenades, and I could practically see the older employees flinching every time she opened her mouth. She'd throw around phrases like paradigm shifts and disruptive innovation during meetings about updating the office printer, for crying out loud. Meanwhile, there I was, the guy who'd been keeping this company's digital infrastructure running smoother than a freshly waxed bowling lane. While everyone else was panicking about the latest software update or freaking out when the email server hiccuped, I was the one working until 3 in the morning, making sure nobody's computer turned into an expensive paperweight. I'd automated half the systems, created backup protocols that could survive a nuclear apocalypse, and wrote scripts that practically babysat our network 24/7. But did any of that matter in Tiffany's brave new world? Not a chance in hell. She was too busy redesigning the company org chart to look like something from a Pinterest board, complete with pastel colors and inspirational quotes in Comic Sans font. I kid you not, Comic Sans. For a tech company. I nearly quit right then and there, but curiosity killed the cat, and I wanted to see just how spectacular this train wreck was going to be. The woman treated the office like her personal kingdom, floating around in designer outfits that cost more than most of our junior developers made in a month. She'd hold brainstorming sessions that were basically just her talking at us while sipping some overpriced matcha latte and nodding at her own brilliant insights. The rest of us would sit there like hostages, occasionally making the required sounds to indicate we were still breathing. But here's what really got me. I wasn't worried. Not even a little bit. Sure, watching her fumble through basic HR concepts was like watching someone try to perform surgery with oven mitts. But I knew something she didn't. I knew that underneath all her fancy presentations and corporate buzzword bingo, this company ran on systems that I'd built, maintained, and nursed back to health more times than I could count. I was the digital backbone of this place, the guy who made sure their precious profit margins didn't disappear into the void every time a server decided to have an existential crisis. While Tiffany was busy playing dress-up CEO, I was the one making sure the lights stayed on, metaphorically speaking. And if there's one thing I've learned in my years of dealing with corporate politics, it's this. You can't fire gravity, and you definitely can't replace experience with enthusiasm and a fake smile. So I sat back, grabbed another cup of that terrible office coffee, and prepared to watch the show. Little did I know that my front row seat was about to become center stage. You know that moment in every disaster movie where there's always one person who sees the meteor coming while everyone else is just going about their Tuesday? Well, that Tuesday morning started innocently enough. I was nursing my third cup of what our office generously called coffee, but what I'm pretty sure was just brown water with trust issues, trying to debug a legacy system that had more patches than a biker's jacket when Hurricane Tiffany made her grand entrance. Picture this. It's 9:15 a.m., and I'm elbow deep in code that looks like it was written by caffeinated monkeys during an earthquake, when I hear the unmistakable click, click, click of those death trap heels echoing down the hallway. But this time, she wasn't alone. Oh no, this time she was carrying what I can only describe as the Incredible Hulk's morning smoothie. This absolutely radioactive-looking green concoction that seemed to glow with its own internal light source. The thing looked like someone had taken a perfectly innocent lawnmower, fed it nothing but kale and regret for a week, then asked it to vomit into a mason jar. I swear to God, if you'd told me she'd scraped that stuff off the bottom of a swamp and added some chia seeds for texture, I would have believed you without question. The color was so aggressively green that I had to resist the urge to put on sunglasses just to look at it directly. Morning visionaries, she chirped, bursting into our morning stand-up meeting like a caffeinated cheerleader who'd just discovered the power of positive thinking. The word visionaries hung in the air like a bad smell, and I watched as our entire development team, guys who'd been coding since before social media existed, physically recoiled at being called anything other than developers or hey you with the keyboard. But wait, it gets better. She didn't just carry in her swamp juice and call us visionaries. Oh no, that would have been too simple for our newly minted HR queen. She had prepared a presentation. A full-blown, bells and whistles, probably took her 3 hours to make presentation that she'd clearly cobbled together using Canva's motivational garbage template. The first slide hit the screen, and I nearly spit out my coffee. There it was, in bold impact font over a stock photo of impossibly diverse people high-fiving around a laptop that was definitely not running any software anyone had ever heard of, revolutionizing our human capital ecosystem. I looked around the room and caught Marcus from finance making the exact same face I probably was, like someone had just explained quantum physics using only emoji. Now, I know what you're thinking, Tiffany continued, taking a theatrical sip from her green nightmare fuel. Change can be scary, but change is also opportunity. She clicked to the next slide, which featured a motivational quote that looked like it had been ripped straight from a suburban mom's Facebook page. The only constant is change, so let's change constantly, attributed to someone called Anonymous Wisdom. I leaned back in my chair and prepared for what I already knew was going to be a masterclass in corporate buzzword bingo. Sure enough, within the next 10 minutes, she managed to work in synergize, optimize, streamline, right size, ideate, and my personal favorite, leverage our core competencies to maximize stakeholder value. It was like listening to a random corporate jargon generator that had achieved sentience and decided to give a TED Talk. But then came the moment that made my blood run colder than a Windows Me startup screen. She clicked to a slide that was just one sentence, displayed in what I'm pretty sure was supposed to be a dramatic font, but looked more like something you'd see on a haunted house invitation. We're sunsetting legacy systems. Now, if you're not fluent in corporate speak, let me translate that for you. We're getting rid of old stuff because it looks old and we don't understand it. But here's the thing, and this is where my 15 years of experience kicked in like a smoke alarm in a burning building. In tech, legacy systems doesn't mean old and useless. It means the stuff that actually keeps everything running while looking boring enough that executives ignore it. I nearly choked on my stale convenience store muffin. Around me, I could see the other developers starting to connect the dots. Jenny from QA went pale. Rodriguez from DevOps started typing frantically on his phone, probably updating his LinkedIn profile. Even Marcus from Finance, who usually had the emotional range of a calculator, looked like someone had just told him the IRS was auditing his entire extended family. Now, I know this sounds big, Tiffany continued, blissfully unaware that she'd just announced the corporate equivalent of deciding to remove the foundation from a house while people were still living in it. But think of it as spring cleaning. We're making room for innovation. The irony was so thick you could have cut it with a chainsaw. Here she was, talking about innovation while proposing to throw out systems that had been quietly innovating solutions to problems she didn't even know existed. These weren't just random old programs gathering digital dust. These were the automated scripts that kept our servers from melting down every time someone in marketing decided to upload a 500 megabytes PowerPoint presentation. They were the backup systems that had saved our bacon more times than I could count. The monitoring tools that texted me at 3 a.m. when something was about to go sideways so I could fix it before anyone even knew there was a problem. But trying to explain that to Tiffany would have been like trying to teach calculus to a golden retriever. Technically possible, but ultimately frustrating for everyone involved. Instead, I just sat there, watching her click through slides filled with more stock photos of people pointing at charts and graphs that didn't actually represent anything, and started mentally preparing for the conversation I knew was coming. Because here's what Tiffany didn't understand about legacy systems. They're not legacy because they're old. They're legacy because they work so well that nobody wants to touch them. They're the digital equivalent of that one kitchen knife your grandmother had for 40 years that could still cut through anything like butter, while all your fancy new gadgets fell apart after 6 months. As she wrapped up her presentation with a slide that just said questions, over a picture of a mountain climber reaching a summit, because apparently firing people was equivalent to conquering Everest, I realized that this wasn't just about updating software or streamlining processes. This was about someone who'd never spent a single night troubleshooting a critical system failure, deciding that expertise was just another outdated legacy system that needed sunsetting. The meeting ended with the kind of silence usually reserved for moments when someone accidentally sends a private email to the entire company. And as I packed up my laptop and headed back to my desk, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just witnessed the opening act of what was going to be a very expensive lesson in why you don't fix things that aren't broken, especially when you don't understand what they do in the first place. You know that feeling when you're watching a horror movie and the killer is slowly creeping up behind the unsuspecting victim, and you're sitting there yelling at the screen because you can see exactly what's coming, but the poor sucker on screen is completely clueless? Well, that was me at 4:30 p.m. on what I now refer to as Doomsday Tuesday, except I was both the person watching the movie and the poor sucker about to get axed. The email popped up in my inbox with all the subtlety of a brick through a window. Subject line, quick chat, HR and you. No agenda attached. No friendly little, hope you're having a great day. No explanation whatsoever. Just those 4 words sitting there in my Outlook like a digital death sentence written in Times New Roman font. It was the corporate equivalent of receiving a text that just says, "We need to talk," from someone you're pretty sure is about to dump you. I stared at that calendar invite for a solid 30 seconds, watching the little notification badge mock me from my taskbar. Now, I've been around the corporate block long enough to know that quick chat, HR and you, is about as quick as root canal surgery and roughly twice as pleasant. Nobody, and I mean nobody, gets called into HR at 4:30 on a Tuesday for good news. They don't invite you in to tell you about surprise bonuses or company-wide pizza parties. No. 4:30 p.m. is execution hour, when they figure most people have already mentally checked out for the day and won't cause too much of a scene. The walk to Tiffany's office felt like that Green Mile march, except instead of walking toward Old Sparky, I was heading toward a woman who probably thought severance package was some kind of Amazon delivery service. Every step down that hallway echoed like a countdown timer, and I could feel the eyes of my coworkers on me. That mixture of sympathy and relief that comes from watching someone else get called to the principal's office. I knocked on her door, and her voice chirped back with all the artificial sweetness of a diet soda commercial. Come in. When I opened that door, I swear the scene that greeted me looked like something straight out of a fever dream directed by someone who'd watched too many episodes of The Bachelor. There was Tiffany, perched behind her desk like she was posing for the cover of Incompetent Executive Monthly, wearing what I'm pretty sure was a blazer that cost more than my monthly car payment. The desk itself was a masterpiece of performative productivity, a MacBook that probably hadn't been opened since she got it, a stack of business books that were clearly just for show. I could see the Amazon price stickers still on them, and that damn green juice from the morning, now looking like it had achieved sentience and was planning world domination. But here's the kicker. She had positioned herself at this weird angle that made it look like she was doing a photo shoot for LinkedIn influencer content. You know those posts where people pretend to be candidly working while actually posing like they're about to deliver the State of the Union? That was Tiffany, except she was about to deliver my professional death warrant. Please, sit down, she said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk with the kind of smile that dental hygienists use right before they tell you that you need a root canal. I sat down and waited for the corporate theater to begin, because I knew that's exactly what this was going to be, a performance where she got to play the role of difficult but necessary decision-maker, and I got to be unfortunate casualty of progress. She opened what looked like a folder full of official documents, though knowing Tiffany, it was probably just printouts of motivational quotes and her grocery list. So, she began, her voice taking on that artificially solemn tone that people use when they're trying to sound important. I wanted to talk to you about some exciting changes we're making to optimize our human capital infrastructure. I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing. Human capital infrastructure? I wasn't a person getting fired. I was apparently a poorly performing asset being divested from their portfolio. The corporate doublespeak was so thick you could have used it to patch potholes. As you know, she continued, clearly reading from some HR script she'd probably found in that online course of hers. We're moving toward a more streamlined, agile approach to our technological solutions, and unfortunately, that means we need to sunset some of our legacy human resources. Legacy human resources. She actually called me a legacy human resource. I was apparently the human equivalent of Windows XP, functional but outdated and taking up valuable space that could be better used by something shinier and more modern. Then came the moment that will be forever burned into my memory like a bad tattoo you got in college. She looked up from her script, flashed me that 1,000-watt fake smile, and delivered the line that would become corporate legend in our office. Congratulations, you're terminated. Congratulations. She said congratulations like she was announcing that I'd won the lottery instead of telling me I was about to join the unemployment line. The enthusiasm in her voice was so genuine that for a split second, I actually wondered if I'd misunderstood something. Maybe this was some kind of bizarre promotion ceremony? Maybe terminated meant something different in her world of buzzwords and business jargon? But no, the look on her face made it crystal clear. She was genuinely proud of herself for delivering that line, like she'd just nailed a difficult monologue in community theater. I half expected her to ask if I wanted to take a selfie to commemorate the moment, maybe with one of those Instagram filters that adds sparkles, and the caption, "Living my best HR life." The silence that followed was so awkward it had its own gravitational pull. I could see her waiting for some kind of reaction, tears, maybe, or angry shouting, or at least some begging for my job back. Instead, I just sat there, processing the absolute surreal absurdity of what had just happened, and feeling something I hadn't expected, relief. Because here's the thing about getting fired by someone who thinks human capital. This wasn't a reflection of my performance or my value as an employee. This was about someone who'd confused confidence with competence and was about to learn the difference in the most expensive way possible. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my security badge, that little plastic rectangle that had gotten me through the front door every morning for the past 3 years, and placed it gently on her desk. "Here you go," I said, standing up with the kind of calm that comes from knowing something the other person doesn't. Then I looked her straight in the eye, smiled the kind of smile that doesn't quite reach your eyes, and delivered my own little parting gift. "You've got about 15 minutes before the system fails. Tell your dad I said good luck." The look of confusion that flashed across her face was absolutely priceless. It was like watching someone realize they'd just thrown away the instruction manual right before trying to assemble IKEA furniture. Pure, undiluted panic, wrapped in designer clothing and held together with expensive concealer. And with that, I walked out of her office, past my former coworkers who were pretending not to watch, and straight toward what I was pretty sure was going to be the most entertaining few days of my entire career. You know what they say about the best-laid plans of mice and men? Well, apparently they never met a freshly fired IT guy with a serious grudge and an intimate knowledge of exactly which digital house of cards was about to come tumbling down. Instead of doing what any normal, well-adjusted person would do after getting canned, like going home, cracking open a beer, and updating my resume while binge-watching Netflix, I did something that probably says more about my psychological state than I'd like to admit. I walked straight down the street to Benny's Cafe. Now, Benny's isn't some hipster coffee joint with reclaimed wood tables and baristas who look like they moonlight as indie folk singers. No, Benny's is the kind of place where the coffee comes in actual ceramic mugs instead of paper cups with your name spelled wrong, where the Wi-Fi password is still password 123, and where Benny himself, a 60-something guy who looks like he's seen every type of human drama play out over coffee and pastries, doesn't ask questions when someone walks in looking like they've just witnessed their own professional execution. The bell above the door made that same tired ding it had been making for the past decade as I pushed my way inside. The place smelled like coffee beans, old leather, and the faint aroma of dreams deferred. Basically, the perfect atmosphere for a guy who'd just been congratulated on his termination by a woman who probably thought server maintenance involved taking them out for dinner and a movie. The usual? Benny called out from behind the counter, not even looking up from whatever crossword puzzle was keeping him occupied. The man had seen me walk in here every morning for 3 years on my way to work, and apparently, he'd memorized my order somewhere between 7 across. Disappointing workplace situation and 12 down. Caffeinated coping mechanism. Actually, I said, settling into the window booth that gave me a perfect view of my former office building across the street. Make it a black coffee and whatever croissant you've got that looks like it's given up on life. Benny raised an eyebrow. The man could communicate more with one eyebrow than most people could with a PowerPoint presentation, but he didn't comment. Just poured the coffee, grabbed a croissant that looked about as enthusiastic as I felt, and set them both down in front of me with the kind of efficiency that comes from years of serving caffeine to people having various stages of existential crises. I wrapped my hands around that mug like it was a life preserver and stared out the window at the building where, 15 minutes ago, I'd been a valued employee, keeping critical systems running, and now I was just another guy in a coffee shop with nowhere to be and all the time in the world to watch the show. The silence was absolutely beautiful. No emergency alerts pinging on my phone. No panicked emails about systems going down. No last-minute, quick questions that turned into 3-hour troubleshooting sessions. Just me, my coffee, and the peaceful quiet that comes from knowing that whatever was about to happen next was officially not my problem anymore. I took a sip of coffee, actual good coffee, not that brown water they served in the office, and let my mind wander to the digital time bombs I'd left behind. See, here's something they don't teach you in those compassionate terminations in 5 easy steps courses. When you fire the guy who's been keeping your technology infrastructure running with digital duct tape and prayers, you better make sure you understand what he actually does all day. Those legacy systems Tiffany was so eager to sunset, half of them were running on automated scripts I'd written during late-night troubleshooting sessions. Little programs that quietly fixed problems before they became disasters, updated security patches while everyone was sleeping, and performed about 50 different maintenance tasks that kept everything running smoothly. They weren't documented in any manual because they were the kind of solutions you create when you care more about keeping things working than you do about following proper procedure. I'd spent years building what I like to think of as digital safety nets, backup systems for the backup systems, monitoring scripts that watched other monitoring scripts, automated fixes for the most common problems that would wake me up at 2 a.m. It was like having a really good pit crew for a race car. Except the race car was the entire company's technology infrastructure, and the pit crew was just me, fueled by caffeine and the kind of stubborn pride that comes from solving problems nobody else even knew existed. But here's the thing about safety nets. They're invisible until you need them. And they're really invisible when the person who built them isn't around to explain why they exist in the first place. I picked at my croissant, which, true to form, looked like it had been having about as good a day as I was, and watched the office building across the street. From my little window booth, I could see the lights still on in the IT department. Probably some poor junior developer trying to figure out why his afternoon had suddenly turned into a disaster movie starring him as the guy who has no idea what he's doing. My phone sat silent on the table next to my coffee cup. No calls. No texts. No. Hey. Wait. We need to talk about this messages. Nothing. It was like I'd just vanished from their corporate universe, leaving behind nothing but an empty desk and a whole lot of automated processes that were going to start failing right around the time Tiffany finished celebrating her successful human capital optimization. The beautiful irony wasn't lost on me. In trying to eliminate legacy systems, they just eliminated the person who understood how those systems actually worked. It was like firing your translator right before a diplomatic mission and then wondering why nobody understands what you're trying to say. So I sat there in Benny's, sipping coffee that didn't taste like disappointment and watching my former workplace like a retired firefighter watching smoke start to curl up from a building's windows. Patient, calm, and absolutely certain that the real show was about to begin. Nothing quite says, "Good morning," like watching someone else's digital empire crumble while you're sitting in your pajamas eating cereal that's probably meant for kids but tastes like childhood nostalgia. It was 10:47 a.m. on Wednesday. Exactly 18 hours and 17 minutes since I'd walked out of that office, when the first domino fell, and let me tell you, it fell with the grace and subtlety of a drunk elephant wearing roller skates. I was halfway through my second bowl of Lucky Charms. Don't judge me. I was going through a transition period when my phone started lighting up like a Christmas tree in Times Square. Not with calls, mind you. Apparently nobody wanted to actually talk to the guy they'd just fired, but with text messages that ranged from confused to panic to what I can only describe as digitally hysterical. The beauty of it all was that I'd seen this movie before. Hell, I'd written the script, directed it, and knew exactly how it was going to end. You see, when you spend 3 years quietly building automated systems that keep a company running, you tend to remember exactly what happens when those systems stop getting the digital equivalent of their morning vitamins. Marcus from finance was first to crack. His message popped up at exactly 10:47 a.m. Hey, random queue, where's the invoice system? The ellipsis after, hey, told me everything I needed to know. Marcus was a numbers guy, straightforward, no nonsense. The kind of person who communicated in spreadsheets and rarely used more words than absolutely necessary. When Marcus started throwing around random cues and awkward punctuation, you knew the situation had moved from minor inconvenience to pants-on-fire emergency. I took another spoonful of cereal and watched as my phone screen filled up with increasingly desperate messages. It was like watching a slow-motion car accident, except the cars were made of code and the accident was entirely preventable if someone had just listened to the guy who'd been preventing these exact crashes for the past 3 years. By 11:15, Rudy from legal had joined the party. Now, Rudy was the kind of lawyer who could find 17 different ways to say no without actually using the word. So when his message came through, "Are you available for a consult?" I nearly choked on my Lucky Charms. Rudy asking for a consult was like the Pope asking if you had a minute to chat about religion. It just didn't happen unless the world was actually ending. But the crown jewel of this digital disaster parade came from my own wife, Ellie, at 11:32 a.m. Her message was perfectly crafted in that way that only spouses can manage when they're trying to sound casual while simultaneously accusing you of corporate terrorism. Did you do something? Did I do something? Oh, honey, that was the beautiful part. I didn't do anything. That was exactly the problem they were discovering. For 3 years, I'd been the guy who did everything. The automated backups, the system maintenance, the server monitoring, the database optimization, the network security updates. I was like a digital janitor working the night shift, cleaning up messes before anyone even knew they existed. The APIs were probably throwing 500 errors like confetti at a New Year's party. The procurement dashboard, that beautiful piece of custom code I'd built to track purchase orders, was likely showing error messages, or worse, that generic sad clown emoji that I'd programmed as a placeholder during development and never bothered to change because, well, I thought it was funny and nobody else ever saw the error pages anyway. Email bouncing was just the appetizer. The real main course was going to be when they realized that their entire customer management system depended on a series of interconnected scripts that I'd written during a particularly inspired weekend 2 years ago. Those scripts were like a house of cards, each one supporting the others in a delicate balance that looked simple from the outside, but was actually held together by the digital equivalent of prayer and duct tape. I could picture the scene in the office. Tiffany probably standing in the middle of the IT department wearing another one of those power suits that cost more than most people's rent, frantically waving her iPad like a magic wand and expecting technology to bend to her will through sheer force of positive thinking and motivational buzzwords. The procurement system showing a sad clown emoji was my personal favorite touch. I'd added that during a particularly late night when the regular error message seemed too boring. Now that little digital clown was probably staring back at half the company, a cheerful reminder that sometimes the universe has a sense of humor. I finished my cereal, rinsed the bowl, and made myself a proper cup of coffee. Not the office swill I'd been choking down for 3 years, but real coffee from beans that hadn't been sitting in a corporate break room since the Bush administration. My phone kept buzzing with increasingly frantic messages, but I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to respond to any of them. Not yet. This wasn't about being petty or vindictive. It was about letting natural consequences run their course. Sometimes the best teacher is experience, and right now, my former employer was getting a crash course in why you don't fire the person who keeps your digital world spinning. I poured my coffee, settled into my favorite chair, and prepared to watch the rest of the show unfold. After all, I had front row seats to the best cautionary tale about corporate decision-making since New Coke. You know what they say about karma? It's a real bitch, and apparently she wears designer heels and has a psychology degree from the University of Unintended Consequences. By Thursday morning, the digital apocalypse I'd been quietly anticipating had evolved from a gentle drizzle of system failures into a full-blown hurricane of technological chaos, and Tiffany was right in the eye of it, spinning like a caffeinated tornado in a Nordstrom blazer. I wasn't there to witness it firsthand, of course. Being unemployed has its perks, like being able to watch Netflix in my underwear at 11 a.m. on a Thursday. But thanks to the modern miracle of workplace gossip and the fact that half my former coworkers still had my number, I was getting real-time updates better than any live-streaming disaster coverage CNN could provide. The star of today's show was apparently Tiffany herself, who had transformed from confident corporate queen to full-blown panic mode faster than you could say legacy systems. According to Jenny from QA, who'd been texting me updates like she was reporting from a war zone, our dear head of HR had spent the morning running around the office like a chicken with its head cut off. Except this chicken was wearing Jimmy Choo's and carrying an iPad like it was some kind of magic talisman that could fix decades of accumulated technical debt. The image I got from Jenny's play-by-play was absolutely beautiful. Tiffany, in all her spray-tan glory, clicking across the office floor in those ridiculous heels that she probably thought made her look powerful, but actually sounded like a metronome counting down to corporate disaster. Every step was apparently punctuated by her waving that iPad around like she was conducting an invisible orchestra of incompetence. But here's where it gets really good. According to Rodriguez from DevOps, who was apparently live-tweeting this disaster to a group chat that I was thankfully still part of, Tiffany had actually marched into the server room. The server room. This is a woman who probably thought server room meant where they kept the coffee machines, and she just waltzed right into the digital heart of the company wearing heels that could probably puncture fiber optic cables. Rodriguez's description was poetry in motion. She's in here waving her iPad like Harry Potter with a broken wand, asking why the rollback script isn't working. The rollback script. The beautiful, elegant piece of automation that I'd written specifically for moments like this, when systems failed and needed to be restored to a previous working state. The only problem was that rollback scripts don't run themselves, and the person who knew how to run them was currently sitting at home in his boxer shorts, eating leftover pizza and catching up on The Office reruns. The junior developer who tried to explain this to her deserves a medal for diplomatic communication under fire. According to the group chat, this poor kid, probably fresh out of college and still young enough to believe that corporate hierarchies made logical sense, whispered the truth that everybody already knew but nobody wanted to say out loud. Because your brother-in-law used to handle it. Brother-in-law, not the IT specialist, or our systems administrator, or even that guy who knew how everything worked. Brother-in-law, like I was some random relative who'd been hanging around the office fixing computers as a favor, rather than the person who'd spent 3 years building and maintaining the digital infrastructure that kept their entire operation from collapsing into a pile of expensive paperweights. The response from Tiffany was apparently spectacular. Jenny reported that she'd snapped back with all the authority of someone who'd learned management techniques from reality TV shows. Well, he's not here anymore, is he? The exclamation point was audible, according to witnesses. The kind of sharp, defensive tone that people use when they're starting to realize they've made a catastrophic mistake but aren't quite ready to admit it yet. But here's the thing about computers. They don't care about your authority, your designer clothes, or your motivational buzzwords. They don't respond to positive thinking or corporate team-building exercises. When a server throws a 500 error, it's not making a statement about your leadership style. It's just following the inexorable laws of cause and effect that govern the digital universe. The servers, bless their digital hearts, responded to Tiffany's authority exactly the way you'd expect, by coughing up more 500 errors than a computer science student's first attempt at web development. It was like watching someone try to intimidate a broken toaster into making perfect toast, technically possible in theory, but requiring a fundamental misunderstanding of how both intimidation and toasters work. Meanwhile, as this corporate theater of the absurd played out in real time across my phone screen, I was living my best unemployed life. I'd traded my business casual uniform for pajama pants and slippers, swapped stale office coffee for the good stuff I actually enjoyed drinking, and replaced the constant stress of monitoring systems that could fail at any moment with the simple pleasure of watching someone else discover exactly why those systems needed monitoring in the first place. The best part? I was updating my resume between text message updates, adding bullet points about maintaining critical infrastructure and preventing system-wide failures through proactive monitoring. You know, all those boring technical things that had kept the company running smoothly until someone decided that experience was just another outdated legacy system that needed to be sunset. There's something deeply satisfying about watching a house of cards collapse, especially when you're the guy who spent years reinforcing those cards with digital duct tape and prayer, only to be told that your services were no longer required. By Friday morning, the situation at my former workplace had apparently escalated from minor technical difficulties to DEFCON 1. CEO in the building, and somebody's about to get their ass handed to them on a silver platter. The man himself, Mr. Vance Harrington III, captain of industry, builder of empires, and father of the year's most spectacular HR disaster, had apparently made his grand entrance around 9:30 a.m. like some kind of corporate superhero arriving to save the day. Except instead of a cape, he wore a $1,000 suit, and instead of superpowers, he had the kind of volcanic temper that comes from watching your life's work circle the digital drain, because your daughter thought she could run HR like a lifestyle blog. Rodriguez was still feeding me updates from the group chat, and his description of Mr. Harrington's entrance was nothing short of cinematic. Picture this: the elevator doors opening like the gates of corporate hell, revealing a man who'd built this company from nothing and was now watching it implode because someone had convinced him that family loyalty was more important than operational competence. What the hell happened? He'd apparently barked as he stormed through the office, his voice carrying the kind of authority that comes from 30 years of making decisions that actually matter. This wasn't some middle manager having a bad day. This was the guy whose name was on the building, whose signature was on everyone's paychecks, and whose patience had apparently run thinner than the company's current operational capacity. But here's where the story gets really beautiful, in that tragic Shakespeare kind of way. Tiffany, bless her artificially tanned heart, was apparently standing there in the middle of this digital wasteland she'd created, still clutching that iPad like it was some kind of security blanket, when Daddy Dearest demanded an explanation for why his company had suddenly started operating with all the efficiency of a lemonade stand run by caffeinated squirrels. Her response? Pure, unfiltered nepotism in action. My brother-in-law sabotaged everything. Now, I've got to hand it to her. When Tiffany committed to a narrative, she really went all in. Sabotage. Like I was some kind of digital terrorist who'd spent my nights secretly planting code bombs throughout the company's infrastructure, just waiting for the right moment to bring down the entire operation out of spite. The sheer audacity of it was almost impressive, in the same way that watching someone try to convince a judge that the stop sign jumped out in front of their car is impressive. But here's the thing about working with people for years: they get to know you. They see you staying late to fix problems that nobody else even knew existed. They watch you come in on weekends to update systems that wouldn't wait for Monday morning. They know the difference between sabotage and simply stepping away from a situation where your expertise wasn't valued. The tech who corrected her deserves a raise and probably a medal for courage under fire. According to Ginny's blow-by-blow account, this absolute hero of truth-telling looked Mr. Harrington straight in the eye and delivered the line that probably saved what was left of the company's dignity. "No, sir. He didn't sabotage us. He just stopped saving us." 5 words. He just stopped saving us. That's all it took to distill 3 years of automated scripts, late-night troubleshooting sessions, and proactive problem-solving into a single, devastating truth bomb. I wasn't a saboteur. I was a lifeguard who'd been fired from the beach and was now watching from a safe distance as people discovered they'd never actually learned how to swim. The silence that followed that statement was apparently so thick you could have cut it with a server blade and served it at a funeral for corporate competence. Mr. Harrington, according to multiple eyewitness accounts, went through what Ginny described as 17 different facial expressions in about 3 seconds, ranging from confusion to understanding to the kind of rage that makes volcanoes look like gentle garden sprinklers. Rodriguez reported that you could practically see the exact moment when the light bulb went on in the old man's head. This wasn't about sabotage or revenge or any kind of malicious intent. This was about natural consequences. This was about what happens when you fire the person who's been quietly preventing disasters and then act surprised when those disasters start happening. The realization hit him like a digital freight train. His daughter hadn't just fired an employee, she'd unplugged the very systems that kept his company running. She'd dismissed the human equivalent of antivirus software and then wondered why everything started getting infected with problems. I could only imagine what was going through Mr. Harrington's mind in that moment. Here was a man who'd spent decades building something meaningful, something that provided jobs and services and actually contributed to the world, watching it all unravel because he'd trusted family over competence. The classic tale of nepotism meeting reality, with reality winning by technical knockout in the first round. My phone buzzed with another update from the group chat. The boss just said something about unplugged firewalls, and I think Tiffany might be crying. From my comfortable position on my couch, wearing yesterday's t-shirt and eating cereal directly from the box, I couldn't help but feel a small twinge of something that might have been sympathy. But then I remembered that "congratulations, you're terminated" line, and the sympathy evaporated faster than server uptime during a poorly planned system update. You know that moment in a zombie movie where the survivors realize they're completely screwed and start making increasingly desperate attempts to contact the outside world for help? Well, that was apparently the energy at my former workplace by Friday afternoon. Except instead of zombies, they were dealing with cascading system failures, and instead of a radio, they were using every digital platform known to humanity to try to reach the one person who could save them from their own spectacular incompetence. It started innocently enough. I was in my kitchen, making what had become my new favorite unemployed person breakfast: scrambled eggs with cheese and a side of "I don't have to deal with corporate bullshit anymore," when my phone started buzzing with notifications like a possessed electronic device in a horror movie. The first one caught me completely off guard, not because it was unexpected, but because of how it was delivered. A LinkedIn message from my wife. My own wife was sliding into my LinkedIn DMs like some kind of desperate recruiter trying to poach talent for a failing startup. The message itself was a masterpiece of casual desperation wrapped in the kind of corporate speak that Ellie had apparently absorbed through osmosis from working in that toxic environment. "Hey babe. LOL, things got weird at work. Can we talk? Hey babe. LOL." Like we were college acquaintances catching up after a decade, instead of married people who shared a mortgage and argued about whose turn it was to take out the trash. The fact that she'd resorted to LinkedIn, to communicate with her own husband told me everything I needed to know about how thoroughly the company had descended into digital chaos. Their internal communication systems were probably so fried that even the executives were reduced to using social media platforms to talk to each other. But Ellie's LinkedIn slide was just the opening act. The real entertainment began when Tiffany herself started her digital apology tour, hitting every platform with the desperation of an influencer whose follower count had just dropped by half. First came the Slack message, which was hilarious because Slack was probably hanging together with digital paperclips and positive thinking at this point. Then an email to my personal account, because apparently she'd finally figured out that work email might not be the most reliable communication method when your entire IT infrastructure was having an existential crisis. The progression of her messages read like the 5 stages of grief compressed into a single afternoon of increasingly frantic digital communication. Denial. I'm sure this is all just a temporary glitch. Anger. This is really unprofessional of you. Bargaining. Can we find a mutually beneficial solution? Depression. I know I made mistakes. And finally, the crown jewel of corporate desperation. A $10 Venmo payment with the message, please answer folded hands. $10. She thought she could buy my attention with the cost of a mediocre lunch. The woman who'd fired me while wearing a blazer that probably cost more than my car payment was now trying to bribe me with the kind of money you tip a delivery driver. The sheer audacity of it was so breathtaking that I actually screenshotted it, because some moments in life are too perfect not to preserve for posterity. The Venmo payment became the star of my personal entertainment show. I showed it to my neighbor Bob, who nearly choked on his beer laughing. I sent it to my college buddies in our group chat, where it immediately became a meme. Got problems? Send $10 on Venmo. Became our running joke for the next week. I was seriously considering framing it and hanging it in my home office as a reminder of the precise monetary value that corporate desperation places on expert knowledge. But the real heavyweight champion of apologetic messaging came from the man himself, Mr. Vance Harrington III. His email arrived in my personal inbox around 4 p.m., with a subject line that probably took his assistant 3 drafts to get right. Let's revisit things. Not, I made a mistake, or we need to talk, or even please help us. Just, let's revisit things. Like we were discussing vacation plans instead of the smoking crater where his company's digital infrastructure used to be. The email itself was a masterclass in executive-level damage control. No direct apologies. Can't have the CEO admitting fault, after all, but plenty of corporate doublespeak about reassessing our human capital strategies and exploring mutually beneficial arrangements. It was the kind of language that said, we're completely screwed and we know it, without actually using those words, wrapped in the kind of professional courtesy that comes with a salary that has more zeros than most people's mortgage payments. Reading between the lines was like doing a crossword puzzle written in desperation. We've encountered some unexpected technical challenges, translated to everything is on fire, and we don't know how to use a digital fire extinguisher. Your expertise would be valuable in resolving our current situation. Mint, please God come back, before we lose our biggest client, and Daddy has to explain to the board why his daughter destroyed a profitable company in less than a week. The beautiful part was that every single one of these messages, from Ellie's LinkedIn slide to Mr. Harrington's corporate poetry, operated under the same fundamental misunderstanding of the situation. They all seemed to think this was a negotiation, like I was holding their digital infrastructure hostage and waiting for the right offer to release it back to them. They couldn't seem to grasp that this wasn't about money or pride or even revenge. This was about the simple fact that systems don't run themselves, and expertise isn't something you can download from the internet when you suddenly realize you need it. I didn't respond to any of them. Not one. Instead, I did what any reasonable person would do when faced with this level of corporate comedy gold. I made banana bread. There's something deeply therapeutic about baking when your former employer is imploding via text message. The measuring, the mixing, the patient waiting for the oven timer. It's the exact opposite of the instant gratification that the digital world demands. While the banana bread was in the oven, filling my kitchen with the smell of actual accomplishment, I settled in for The Office marathon. Season 3, specifically, the episodes where Michael Scott makes his most spectacularly bad decisions and somehow expects everyone else to clean up the mess. The parallels to my current situation were so perfect that I half expected Jim to break the fourth wall and acknowledged that sometimes real life writes better comedy than fiction. My phone kept buzzing throughout the afternoon. More messages, more notifications, more desperate attempts to establish contact with the guy who used to prevent these exact disasters from happening. But I was done being their digital firefighter. I was done working weekends to fix problems that could have been prevented. Most importantly, I was done being taken for granted by people who thought IT support was something you could outsource to Google searches and motivational thinking. The banana bread turned out perfect, by the way. Golden brown, perfectly moist, with just the right amount of sweetness. Unlike some people's decision-making processes, my baking skills had remained consistently reliable throughout this entire corporate meltdown. There's something beautiful about serendipity, especially when it shows up at your doorstep dressed like a professional opportunity and carrying a briefcase full of vindication. It was Monday morning, exactly 1 week since I'd been congratulated on my termination by a woman who thought system architecture was something you studied at art school, when fate decided to knock on my door, literally. I was in full unemployed guy mode, wearing pajama pants that had seen better decades and a t-shirt that proudly declared my allegiance to a band I'd loved in college, when the doorbell rang with the kind of official tone that usually means either bad news or someone trying to sell you solar panels. But when I opened the door, there wasn't a salesperson or a process server. Just my mailman, Gary, holding what looked like the kind of envelope that important things come in. Special delivery, Gary said with a grin that suggested he knew something I didn't. Looks fancy. He was right. This wasn't one of those flimsy white envelopes that bills and junk mail travel in. This was heavy paper stock, cream-colored, with the kind of weight that suggested whoever sent it had both money and taste. The return address was embossed, actually embossed, with the logo for GridSync Solutions. Now, GridSync wasn't just any tech company. These were the guys who'd been quietly revolutionizing enterprise software, while bigger companies were busy making flashy announcements about revolutionary paradigm shifts that turned out to be rebranded versions of things that had existed for years. GridSync was where serious developers went when they wanted to work on problems that actually mattered, with budgets that reflected the value of real expertise. I'd heard from GridSync before, of course. In the tech world, good people know other good people, and word travels fast when someone consistently delivers solutions that actually work. They'd reached out a couple of times over the past few years. Nothing pushy, just the occasional, "Hey, if you ever want to talk, we're here," kind of message that lets you know you're on their radar without making you feel like you're being stalked by corporate recruiters. But this envelope felt different. The timing was either incredibly coincidental or someone at GridSync had connections to the corporate gossip network and knew exactly what had gone down at Harrington Industries. I carried it to my kitchen table, poured myself a proper cup of coffee, the good stuff, not the battery acid I'd been drinking at my previous job, and opened it with the kind of anticipation usually reserved for Christmas morning or test results from the doctor. The letterhead was clean, professional, understated. Everything that Tiffany's Canva presentations weren't. No clip art, no motivational quotes, no pictures of diverse people pointing at laptops. Just elegant typography and a logo that managed to look both modern and timeless. The letter itself was short, direct, and written in the kind of language that people use when they actually know what they're talking about. "We've seen what you're capable of. Ready when you are." That was it. No bullshit about human capital optimization or synergistic partnerships. No requests for cover letters or 3 rounds of interviews where I'd have to pretend to be excited about their company culture and core values. Just a simple acknowledgement that they knew my work and wanted me to do more of it. But the real kicker was in the next paragraph. 6-month contract, remote friendly, rate negotiable based on your requirements. Remote friendly, rate negotiable. These weren't just empty phrases. They were recognition that good developers don't need to be micromanaged, and that expertise has value that goes beyond whatever HR departments think the market rate should be. The contract details were outlined with the kind of clarity that comes from people who've actually worked in tech instead of just managing people who work in tech. Project scope, deliverables, timelines, all laid out in language that made sense instead of the kind of corporate poetry that sounds impressive but means nothing. And the best part? The project they wanted me for was rebuilding a legacy system for a client whose previous development team had apparently tried to modernize their infrastructure and ended up creating the digital equivalent of a house fire. Legacy systems. The same outdated technology that Tiffany had wanted to sunset was exactly what GridSync's client needed rebuilt. The irony was so perfect it felt like the universe had a sense of humor and was finally letting me in on the joke. I signed that contract before I'd even finished reading the terms and conditions. Not because I was desperate. Hell, I'd been having the best week of my professional life watching my former employer discover the difference between managing people and actually understanding what those people do. I signed it because GridSync represented everything that my previous job wasn't. Respect for expertise, clear communication, and the kind of professional environment where technical decisions were made by people who understood technology. The signing bonus alone was more than Tiffany's insulting $10 Venmo bribe. But that wasn't what made me smile as I sealed the envelope with my signature. What made me smile was the realization that while my former employer was probably still trying to figure out why their servers kept throwing tantrums, I was about to start working on the kind of project that would actually challenge me, with people who valued the same attention to detail that had kept Harrington Industries running smoothly for 3 years. My first project at GridSync? Rebuilding a legacy system that another company had tried to modernize by throwing out decades of accumulated knowledge and starting from scratch with the latest frameworks and buzzwords. Sound familiar? The client had learned the hard way that legacy doesn't mean broken. It means battle-tested by reality. As I walked to the mailbox to send back my signed contract, I couldn't help but think about Tiffany and her presentation about sunsetting legacy systems. Somewhere across town, she was probably still trying to figure out why computers don't respond to motivational speaking, while I was about to get paid very well to rebuild the exact kind of systems she'd dismissed as outdated. Sometimes the universe doesn't just have a sense of humor. Sometimes it has perfect timing too. 3 weeks into my new life as a respected contractor who got paid what he was actually worth, I found myself walking past my old office building on the way back from lunch with my new GridSync teammates. It wasn't intentional. Well, maybe it was a little intentional, but who's keeping track? And what I saw there was so perfectly symbolic that I had to stop and appreciate the poetry of corporate karma in action. The building looked like it had given up on life. The usual bustle of people coming and going had been replaced by the kind of eerie quiet you see in zombie movies right before someone discovers that the town has been completely abandoned. Most of the windows were dark, creating this checkerboard pattern of emptiness that made the whole place look like a giant crossword puzzle with too many missing letters. But the real masterpiece was taped to the front entrance, a handwritten sign that read, "Closed for maintenance," in what looked like sharp a marker on printer paper. Not even the good printer paper, the cheap stuff that jams in the machine and makes everything look like it was printed during a minor earthquake. Someone had tried to make it look official by adding some duct tape around the edges. But duct tape doesn't fix everything, despite what every IT person has been told at some point in their career. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds, just taking it all in. The building where I'd spent 3 years keeping digital disasters at bay, where I'd worked late nights and early mornings to make sure everyone else could do their jobs without thinking about servers or databases or any of the invisible infrastructure that makes modern business possible. Now it sat there like a technological ghost town, a monument to what happens when you mistake confidence for competence. Did I smile? Maybe. Just a little. The kind of smile you get when you see that the bully from high school ended up exactly where you thought they would, working at their dad's used car lot, and still talking about their glory days on the JV football team. It wasn't mean-spirited, exactly. It was more like cosmic justice wearing a very comfortable pair of shoes. I kept walking, and by the time I got home to my sunroom office, yes, I now had a sunroom office, complete with plants that I hadn't killed yet and a coffee machine that made actual coffee instead of brown disappointment. I'd moved on to thinking about more important things, like the legacy system rebuild I was working on, which was turning out to be exactly the kind of challenging, interesting work that made me remember why I'd gotten into tech in the first place. That's when LinkedIn decided to provide the evening's entertainment. A notification popped up on my phone. Tiffany Harrington has made a post. I almost ignored it. I mean, who needs that kind of second-hand embarrassment in their life? But curiosity killed the cat, and apparently I was feeling feline that evening. The post was everything I could have hoped for and more. A carefully staged photo of Tiffany in what looked like expensive athleisure wear, sitting in what was probably her kitchen but photographed to look like a lifestyle magazine spread, with the kind of lighting that suggested she'd spent more time setting up the shot than actually writing the caption. The text was pure LinkedIn influencer gold. Taking time to focus on my wellness and rediscover my purpose. Dizzy #healing #boss energy. Boss energy. She was calling it boss energy. The woman who destroyed a functioning company because she thought expertise was just another form of negativity was now trying to rebrand her spectacular failure as a spiritual journey. It was like watching someone burn down a house and then posting inspirational quotes about the therapeutic benefits of watching flames dance. But the real entertainment was in the comments section, which had turned into a masterclass in professional passive aggression. The tech community, it turns out, has a long memory and a shorter tolerance for bullshit than most industries. Did your purpose delete the company files too? From someone with a profile picture that screamed, "Senior developer, who's seen this movie before?" HR, horrible results? Which was probably the kind of dad joke that kills at developer conferences, but cuts deep when your entire career has just imploded. And my personal favorite. Try listening to engineers next time, champ. Short, sweet, and delivered with the surgical precision of someone who'd probably been on the receiving end of too many quick chats with HR departments that thought technical expertise was just another soft skill you could learn from a YouTube tutorial. Tiffany had tried to limit replies, probably after the first few comments made it clear that her attempt at spiritual rebranding wasn't going to fly with people who understood the difference between actual leadership and motivational theater. But limiting replies on LinkedIn is like trying to hold back the ocean with a screen door. It might slow things down, but the water's going to find a way through eventually. I closed LinkedIn and went back to my actual work, which involved solving real problems for people who appreciated the solutions. My current project was coming along beautifully, a complete rebuild of a financial system that another company had tried to modernize by throwing out 30 years of institutional knowledge and replacing it with whatever framework was trending on developer Twitter that week. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Tiffany was posting about finding her purpose, I was getting paid extremely well to rebuild the exact kind of system she'd wanted to eliminate. While she was talking about wellness and healing, I was working from my sunroom in socks with holes in them, answering to people who respected my expertise instead of treating it like an inconvenience. Revenge? No, that wasn't the right word. Revenge implies effort, and I hadn't put in any effort at all. I just stepped away from a toxic situation and let gravity do its work. Sometimes the best response to corporate chaos isn't to fight back. It's to find somewhere better to work and let natural consequences handle the rest. My coffee was perfect, my code was clean, and my former employer was a cautionary tale that other people could learn from. Life, it turned out, was pretty good when you didn't have to save people from their own decisions.